Hello and welcome back to the Alnwick Castle Podcast. I'm Daniel Watkins.
And I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And today's episode continues our series looking at the castle and the Percy family's involvement in the Wars of the Roses. You might have already listened to our episode about the new book Lions of the Red Rose by the 12th Duke of Northumberland. Look for episode 55 in our podcast archive if you haven't.
Today's episode is all about the new exhibition inside the castle's breakfast room, created in conjunction with the book. Also called Lions of the Red Rose, it showcases items and documents from the castle's archives dating back to the Wars of the Roses, many of which feature in the book but have never been on public display before.
We met with Alnwick Castle's archivist Chris Hunwick to take us around the exhibition, tell us more about it and find out what people will see when they visit. Please enjoy.
We are very happy to be joined once again on the Alnwick Castle Podcast by Chief Archivist Chris Hunwick. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Now, we're standing in the new exhibition space. Can you explain a little bit about what visitors first see when they enter this room?
Yes. So they leave the lofty space of the dining room and they come into a much smaller space of the corridor, which is now lit dimly with medieval images on the walls. And then as they approach the double door opening into the breakfast room, the first sight that greets you is the gruesome 3 severed heads on spikes being pecked at by vicious-looking ravens or crows, which I think for some visitors is quite a shock.
Yes, yeah.
But these heads represent the Earl of Rutland, the Duke of York, and the Earl of Salisbury, who were all beheaded just after the Battle of Wakefield. And their heads were put on spikes at Micklegate Bar in York, which features in the book, and the illustration that these heads are based on features in the book. So it's quite fitting, and it sort of grabs the attention straight away. The heads themselves were manufactured by the workhouse company that installed the exhibition. They chose 3 of their employees, the young apprentice representing the 17-year-old Earl of Rutland, and 2 older employees who spent hours in latex, covered in latex, to create realistic looking heads. And the Duke of York has a paper or parchment crown nailed to his head, as happened in reality on Micklegate Bar.
Yeah, it's very different from the rest of the staterooms when you come
Yes.
to this room, isn't it?
It's different from any other exhibition we've done in this space. It was the vision of Claire Dakin from Blue the Design Company. When she saw the book, this was her inspiration, and the Duke loved the idea. So as you walk into the room, there is an atmosphere. You see the tattered heraldic banners. There's an orange glow to the light, which actually shows up the ceiling very nicely with the Percy heraldry in the ceiling. And normally there would be a soundtrack as well. We've had to disable that for this morning's interview. The soundtrack is a desolate wind that blows across battlefields, and interspersed with verses from the near contemporary Pyrrhus roll, which is a rhyming verse history of the Percy family from the conquest down to the 5th Earl, written by the 5th Earl's chaplain, William Pyrrhus. This is perhaps one of the treasures of the archive, and you see it here in the first case on your left-hand side, unfurled to the end, which covers that period of the Wars of the Roses. And so the verses that cover that period are read out by an actor with a very dour-sounding voice, which seems quite fitting for this space. And you can see the source that it's come from. The gold leaf on the parchment glints quite nicely in the light. So yes, when you visit in person, you will hear that. But we could read some from here. Let's have a look. Yes, so we can see. I'll give an example of the 4th Earl's verse here. This noble Earl, in King Henry VII's time, at Thirsk was slain in the cause of his king. O horrible mischief, O most cruel crime, in our days not seen so detestable a thing. Their own natural lord the commons so murdering, he goodly commanding them in the king's name to do their duty and keep themselves from blame. And that just gives you a taste of what you would hear. This case on the left-hand side focuses on the second Earl of Northumberland, who is the father of the 4 warrior brothers that give the content to the book. And we've tried to illustrate here a few things that people might not realise. On the top shelf here we have a receipt of homage and fealty of Christopher Curwen by the second Earl at his castle in Cockermouth in Cumberland. The Percys are not just restricted to Northumberland and Yorkshire, their heartlands, but also Cumberland and elsewhere up and down the country. And this is also illustrative of how the bond with the tenants works. They owe homage and fealty to the Lord, and so can be called upon to create a private army and go and dust up some Nevilles and destroy properties around the place. And that's how it works. It's got a lovely example of the second Earl's ring seal still attached, and you can see the design of the Percy lion, which is looking out at you from the seal. Next to it is an electrotype copy of the larger seal, not the ring seal. This would be a seal matrix used to make this, and that's a electrotype copy of the seal, so you can see the detail in it. Percy shield surmounted by a helmet with a lion on top and 2 lion supporters. And that is what the seal below, at the bottom of the case, would have looked like. Sadly now damaged, and we've kept it wrapped in leather. The charter at the bottom here was one of the first acts of the second Earl after his reinstatement, where he's granting or reconfirming existing grants to the chaplains at Alnwick Castle. And I think this illustrates his piety. There are many examples of this in the account rolls, where he is paying to endow chantries and monasteries. In Wormgate in York, the church opposite of St Denis, he paid for a north aisle and the east window. So he's a great patron of churches and monasteries, and we thought that would sort of illustrate that, and that's very early, just a year after his reinstatement. Looking at that charter, hopefully people can pick out that first line, Henricus de Percy, Comes Northumbriae, Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, nicely decorative capital letter to start with. But the eye might be drawn to these brown patches that are within the body of the charter. If you were to fold that charter back up into the small rectangle that it would have been kept, obviously we've relaxed it and opened it for display, you'd find that all the leather patches align on one corner, and this is our friends the rodents who like parchment as a source of protein, and they'll nibble it if they get the chance. So the leather patches are a 19th century repair to missing bits of parchment.
Speaking of rodents, there is a small addition to the exhibition that visitors might not see on first glance.
That's right. He's hiding here in the top left-hand corner, but when you see him, he's illuminated orange. This is Cedric the rat, and Peter Phillips, the artist who also published the book, invented Cedric. He named him, we should say, and Cedric appears twice in the book, and he's made it into the index as well. So it's quite fitting that he's here in the exhibition.
It's an important addition to it.
Yeah. So this second case below Cedric is dedicated to Sir Ralph Percy, who is the last of the 4 warrior brothers to survive, and he is killed at the Battle of Hedgeley Moor in 1464. And in this case, we have an English longbow found at Hedgeley Moor, and actually kept in the family of tenants who had been tenants to the Duke for centuries. And in the 19th century, they presented this bow to the Duke to put into the Antiquities Museum at the castle. So this bow may well have witnessed that battle 560 years ago.
Wow.
Also in the case, we have a drawing. This is an early 19th century drawing of the Percy Cross, which marks the spot where Sir Ralph met his end and uttered his famous dying words, I have saved the bird in my bosom, which to modern ears might sound a bit strange. The usage of that word bird at that date could mean an oath, a secret, or one's conscience. So what we think he meant is that he'd vacillated between Yorkist and Lancastrian. I think whatever happened to be expedient at the time to preserve his life, but at the end he died fighting for the Lancastrians at Hedgeley Moor, and so he'd saved the bird in his bosom. And just below that picture is a small book. This is one of Sir David Smith's antiquarian notebooks. Sir David Smith was the commissioner to the second and third dukes, and he was also a noted antiquarian, and he went to places in the locality and did proper survey drawings of historical points of interest. So what we see here is Percy's Leap, which is just a stone's throw from the cross, and this is the site of a prodigious leap by Sir Ralph on his horse, possibly I assume leading into battle. There's a theory that maybe there was a Bronze Age, Iron Age camp on the moor, and there might have been a defensive ditch. There's no evidence of it now, but that would account for a horse having to leap up to 30 feet is what is claimed. And the site ever since has been marked with two massive whinstone boulders. Well, I say ever since, it isn't now. So what we see here is in the early 19th century, Sir David Smith goes and describes what he sees, and he does this drawing showing a great whinstone that at that point was set into a wall and a sliver of the other whinstone that was left. Because sadly the road, the main road from Alnwick to Wooler, now the A697, were shifted position in the 18th century, and in doing so they smashed one of the stones because it was in the way. Mm-hmm. So the fragment was set into a wall, and then there was still a great whinstone. But Sir David Smith visited the site over a number of years in that early 19th century period, and there's a note that says, NB 1819, this wall is now removed, and the great whinstone is, in a great measure, blasted to pieces. So there is still a little a little lay-by on the 697 with a small walled enclosure with an information panel that describes Percy's leap. But the evidence for the distance of that leap has sadly disappeared. So it's nice to have that record of it.
Now we'll move on to one of the other brothers.
Yes. Here we have, over in the right-hand corner, a case dedicated to Henry Percy, who became the third Earl of Northumberland, and his younger brother, Thomas Percy, Lord Egremont. In the case, we've got some lovely documents. We have a commission from the future third Earl, here acting as Henry Percy, in his role as Warden of the East March. And he is instructing his beloved squire, Christopher Spencer, to capture the large number of raiding Scots and those supporting them within the English East March. And so this is illustrative of the fact that during the Wars of the Roses, the usual border conflict doesn't stop. So, attention is split between raids from the north and internecine war in the south. The other lovely thing about this document is the seal. It's really well preserved. And it features the Percy Crescent and Fetterlock badge, and it's beautifully illustrated there. There's some debate as to the Fetterlock. What is it precisely? There are suggestions that these are manacles that would have bound the wrists together, but there's a less gruesome explanation favoured by William Hilton Dyer Longstaff in his Old Heraldry of the Percys. He describes it as a cloak clasp. Seen in the windows at Beverley Minster, there is an angel with such a cloak clasp, and so he thinks fetterlock or turret, twisting catch. So yes, you can take your pick on those explanations. Next to this is the will of the third Earl, dated 1457, so just 4 years before his death, and he was specifying that he would be buried in the chapel of St Ninian the Bishop within the Cathedral Church of York, near to the tombs of his ancestors, i.e. Harry Hotspur and the first Earl, who were buried in York Minster. Sadly, he died at Towton in 1461, was taken back to York, but there was, he'd been attainted, there was no income from his lands, and so he was buried in St Dennis Church, Wormgate, in York, which on Wormgate there was a Percy Inn, which was one of these buildings that would be maintained for the Percy family when travelling up and down the Great North Road between their estates. So it was a residence of the Percys just across the road from St Dennis Church. And I recently visited it, and the whole north aisle was paid for by the second Earl, another example of his piety, and a great east window. And so it was a fitting place for, it was the Percy family's parish church in York. And so the third Earl and his younger brother Sir Richard, who also died at Towton, were both buried there instead. And then the item in the right-hand side of this case was perhaps my favourite discovery in the archives. This is a title deed for a property in Surrey, which doesn't sound very promising for use in an exhibition, but this was in the Scion X class, which is a section of the archive that in the 18th century and 19th century was put to one side because it related to property that no longer was owned by the estate and the Percys, therefore of no legal interest. Recently, over the last decade or more, we've had a cataloguing project every January with 2 students from the Liverpool University Archives course breaking their teeth on cataloguing. And so I've set different bits of the X-Class catalogue to be looked at in full and put into order and properly catalogued. And this enabled us to search for Lord Egremont to see what we had relating to him, and this title deed flagged up. It's dated the 16th of June 1458, so again just 2 years before his death at Northampton, the Battle of Northampton. And it's a land transaction for a tenement, possibly an inn in Surrey. What's really interesting is that it's a lovely example of the ring seal that Lord Egremont was using, but on the reverse of it is a very clear and defined fingerprint. And I suggest that this is Lord Egremont picking up the wax of the seal to imprint his finger into it with his signet ring. And the wax was still slightly molten, and so it's captured his fingerprint on the underside. And so we're displaying it upside down so you can see that fingerprint. And it's a lovely sort of tangible, physical thing connected to Lord Egremont, who died at the Battle of Northampton outside the King's tent, King Henry VI, trying to protect him from the Earl of March and the Earl of Warwick. And there he died. And we've included a little image that appears in the book, which is from a sort of pedigree roll belonging to Edward IV at the British Library, and it shows the Earl of March kneeling before Henry VI outside the King's tent at Northampton. And just in the bottom right-hand corner is a pile of dismembered body parts, and it's my belief that represents Lord Egremont, because that's where he fell. So it's nice to show those 2 items together.
So you've mentioned the second Earl's seal. We've got Lord Egremont's, got the third Earl's. Do they all have different ones? So would each individual member of the Percy family have had their distinctive mark?
Yes, it's a tradition that once a seal holder dies, very often the seal matrix would be destroyed to prevent forgery. Signet rings, maybe less so, and I must say that Lord Egremont's signet ring with the lion looking out at you is very similar to the second Earl's one. It may have been passed from father to son, possibly, or maybe they're quite similar. We don't necessarily in the archives here have examples of every different Percy seal. The fourth Earl, for instance, we didn't have a good example. His case is the final case here in the corner, but we found a very good example at the National Archives. So in the book is an image from the National Archives of the fourth Earl's seal, which is surrounded with a plaited straw edging, which during that period was quite a common thing to see, a way of protecting the fragile edges of the wax seal. So in the fourth Earl's case here, we see the fourth Earl again acting as Warden of the March, and on behalf of Edward IV, because now the fourth Earl is a Yorkist. He's been raised at the court of Edward IV. He's been reinstated by Edward IV as Earl of Northumberland, and he's a trusted Yorkist. And he works hand in hand with Richard III, fighting in Scotland, and then strangely deserts Richard at the Battle of Bosworth. Or did he? Did he just not hear? The certificate here, with as you can see, the remains of a seal, but it's been damaged and filled in with blank wax, is for the receipt of an oath of allegiance by William Johnson at Warkworth Castle in April 1475. This is a Scot who has obviously crossed the border and is wanting to take residence in England. And this is an official certificate that, yes, he's sworn his oath of allegiance to Edward IV. And he swears it on the Holy Gospels. And it's instructed that Johnson should be given official protection within England. So that's quite again, it illustrates the Percy's involvement across the border. In the middle, this was an interesting deed that jumped out. It relates to the Earl's Inn, another of these inns, in Newcastle. What's really nice about this item is that it's dated the 10th of April 1482, signed by the Earl, and it was done here in Alnwick Castle. So it's nice to see something that was actually signed and written here and sealed. Again, nothing left of that seal. The Earl's Inn is described. George Bird is the fourth Earl's right well-beloved servant, so he's presumably the resident keeper of the inn, keeping it ready for when the Earl uses it. And it's described as next to a vennel, or we would say alley, or ginnel, called Bower Chair in Newcastle upon Tyne. And it opens with the great recital of all the Earl's titles. Henry, Earl of Northumberland, Lord of the Honour of Cockermouth and Petworth, Warden of the East and Middle Marches of England and Ent Scotland, and Justice of all the King's forests from Trent north. To all true Christian men to whom this present writing shall come, see or hear, greeting in our Lord God everlasting. And it's quite a formulaic opening, but it's nice to hear it. Interestingly, this deed is written in English. Quite a lot of the ones under the fourth Earl are in English rather than Latin or French. And the final item in that case is the drawing of the fourth Earl's tomb in Beverley Minster. This was done in the 18th century by Bishop Thomas Percy, the first Duke and Duchess's chaplain, who was sent into Yorkshire to research the ancient Percy heraldry in that county. And so he does these detailed drawings. The tomb is still there in Beverley Minster, but the canopy illustrated here has vanished. So it's really interesting to see the canopy covered in Percy heraldry and mottos. And that's a nice record, again, of something that is no longer there. Then, in the central cases, we have, on the right-hand side, examples of the constant struggle after the rebellion of Hotspur and the first Earl. The Percys were down and out until Henry V reinstated the second Earl, son of Hotspur, as Earl of Northumberland. But he didn't at that point get back all the lands and titles that had been the first Earls and Hotspurs. And what we see here is, in fact, a petition from the third Earl, dated circa 1458, beseeching the king that he could have back properties and land that had not yet been given back to them. And this is a constant theme throughout the century. This is really interesting because of the wording of it. It's very personal. Again, you might be able to read the opening line, meekly beseecheth your highness, your true liegeman, Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, son and heir to Henry, late Earl of Northumberland, benignly to consider that whereas the most Christian prince, the king, your father, whom God pardon of his entire motion and most noble grace, by the advice of his lords, spiritual and temporal, etc. It's just personal, because he talks about the king your father and the late Earl my father, and then he talks of my grandfather, your grandfather, and he's appealing to the king, who at this date would be Henry VI, very much on side with the third Earl. So it was a good time to petition for this, but unfortunately it didn't come to fruition before Towton, and then everything is lost again. Mm-hmm. Until the fourth Earl, who, as I say, was raised a Yorkist, is a very firm Yorkist noble, works hand in hand with Richard III across the border in Scotland, retaking Berwick for England, and indeed the fourth Earl carried the sword Curtana at the coronation of Richard III and probably facilitated that coronation. So he appeals to Richard III for the reinstatement of all the ancient Percy holdings, and this time finally is successful. And this great charter, with the Great Seal of Richard III, unfortunately damaged, so again it's encased in leather. We've put a photograph of what's inside the leather, and then a printed image of what that Great Seal looked like. Again, there can't be many of these around, because Richard III's only on the throne for 2 years. It's an exemplification, so it's royal letters patent, writing out the whole petition that was received from the fourth Earl, which again is in English, and either side it has Latin saying this was received and was granted. And again, the wording of it is really interesting. It talks of Sir Harry Percy, Herry. That often it seems to be the way it's pronounced, perhaps represented in the spelling. And Sir Harry Percy Besayle to the now Earl. And Besayle, Besaile, is an obsolete English word meaning great-grandfather. I think it's quite a neat word and that it should be used again. It's better than a dash, great-grandfather. So, yes, Besayle. So that's my appeal to bring that back into circulation. On the other side of the central case, we have some objects which are contemporary. Here at the top left corner, we have coins of the period that have come from the Antiquities Museum. At the top, we've put the years of the reigns of the different kings in red and white to represent Lancastrian Yorkist. We have coins that represent most of those reigns, apart from the readeption of Henry VI when he was put back on the throne for a year. We don't have any coins in the collection from that 1 year. Similarly, Edward V was technically king for only a few months, and Richard III was only king for 2 years, so neither of those reigns is represented. But we found images of coins that were from that period. The rest we have covered, and these are works of art in their own right. There's gold and silver coins. You can see very often the monarch with his shield and sword in a ship of the period. Lovely imagery. There's some very interesting mottos around the edges. There's one about, he went through the midst of them unseen, and it's a strange biblical quote from Jesus when he was rejected by his own villagers who said, you're just a carpenter's boy, and they tried to throw him off the edge of a cliff. But mystically, he walked through the midst of them unseen. And that's one of the quotes that's on the legend of the coin around the edge. I've learnt a lot about coins and different mint marks. So we've tried to, underneath the coins themselves, are blown up images of them with details circled, and all the different marks that are used. Mullets, which are stars or spurs, trefoil pellets, mascles, which are sort of diamond shape, annulets, little rings, pine cones. There's a whole literature out there about the different uses. And interestingly, Richard III has a little boar's head on his coins. The coins sort of catch the light, but hopefully visitors will be able to see the details that we've circled and picked out. In the middle of the case, we've created a timeline. Because it's such a knotty period, it's really difficult to follow who's on the throne at any one time. So we have the kings down the middle, Above them, we've got the important battles of the Wars of the Roses, and whether a Percy was there or not, and whether that Percy died at that battle. And underneath, we've got the Percy family, and we're recording the births of the four warrior brothers, marriages, deaths in battle, through that period, from the 1410s up to the 1510s, when the 5th Earl is safely back in office and dies peacefully in his bed, which, as the Duke mentioned, is the first one in over a century to do so. And then in the corner here we have an iron sword, mid-15th century, from the Postern Tower. We haven't got much information on its provenance. There is an inscription on the blade, but it's very difficult to see. We are going to try and take images of that under raking light and see if we can make it out, because that would be really interesting. Behind it is an image of the Battle of Towton, a 20th century imagining of it. And then finally, out in the corridor is a case with another longbow of the period, not connected with Hedgley this time, but it's a really nice example. You can see the curve on it. We have a boy's sword, which is still pretty sharp, but much smaller and lighter than the one in the case. And we have 3 cannonballs. These are 62-pounders that were found in the 18th century restoration of the castle down the well in the inner courtyard. And it is thought that they were shoved down the well by a fleeing garrison, so that they didn't fall into the hands of the attackers. And we know the castle changed hands 5 times in a very short period during this turbulent time. So yeah, I hope that's given a feel for the exhibition, and that people will enjoy it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us once again, Chris, and I'm sure visitors will enjoy seeing the exhibition in person when they visit Alnwick Castle.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to visit the exhibition, you'll find it inside the breakfast room within the staterooms at Alnwick Castle. It was created in conjunction with the Lions of the Red Rose, now available to buy in hardback and paperback from the Castle gift shops.
And if you'd like to know more about the Percys and the Wars of the Roses, look back at our previous podcasts where you'll find several episodes exploring this subject.
We will be back in 2 weeks with a look at another part of the castle's history, but until then, I've been Deborah.
And I've been Daniel.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.